University. Please join me in welcoming Representative Lyle Larson, Senator José. Thank you both. So, as a frame for this conversation, I want to think about why we've said we've gathered here today, and that is as we look past the elections over the rise into the legislative session, what are the issues that will be most important that you and your colleagues, 181 of you, will deal with on behalf of this community? Seventh largest in the state, and as I said, incredibly important for all kinds of reasons. It seems like public education is a good place to begin. Public education is important every place.
Correct.
But especially important, as I've come to San Antonio, people always want to talk about public education first. We had Representative Larson an appeal of the decision that came from a lower court on the school finance lawsuit, many hundreds of school districts suing the state saying, yet again, vicious cycle, that our system of funding public education is not equitable, not adequate, is out of compliance with the Constitution. My read, I'm not a lawyer, but my read of the Supreme Court's decision in the appeal was that the school finance system of this state is really, 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 really bad, but just not bad enough to force you all to do something different if you choose not to. Is that how you see it?
Well, I wouldn't say to that extreme, but...
maybe one fewer really? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, it's constitutional, and it
Right.
met that need. But I realized also that Speaker Strauss has said that he's not satisfied with just getting over the constitutional challenge. He wants to look at the financing and making sure that if there's things that we can do to enrich the children in the schools. We've got 80,000 new kids hitting school districts, new kids hitting the school districts every year. More funding can be required, and that he recognizes that one of the priorities from the House perspective will be to address the financing of our educational system.
Now, something you said just jumped out at me, more funding will be required. So that's a commitment on your part that you will be an advocate for spending more on public education?
We got 80,000 new kids coming in, so it's just intuitive that you're going to have to spend more just because of the volume of kids that are being enrolled in our school districts.
Right. Show the gentleman voting aye, Senator Menéndez, on spending more, which is, it doesn't seem like it would be, but in some quarters that's a controversial position, isn't it?
Well, you know, the reality is that we've never fully restored the cuts that were made in 2011. So if we've got 80,000 new students, we're still behind. We're behind where we started in 2011. So I think that as long as we're having elementary classrooms that are not meeting their 22-to-1 legal requirements that we set as legislators, that the district's asking for waivers, as long as we have kids in portable buildings, we're definitely not doing the right thing. As long as we're not providing as many children as they'd like an AP class opportunity, an opportunity to take an AP test, then we're not doing the right thing.
Are you susceptible to the argument, Senator, that money is not the answer? You know, there are places in this country that have a per-student spend higher than Texas, but actually have worse results than Texas. If money were the answer, then the states that spent the most would produce the best results.
I mean, you can't oversimplify that. You can't just
watch me.
Yeah, I know you can try, but I deal with a whole body that does that too.
Yeah.
But the point is this, is that reality is that just speaks to the quality of the teachers that we have and the quality of the students.
Right.
And maybe it's parents trying to make up the difference at home with their children, working harder. But it should not rely. My biggest issue is that a child's educational attainment shouldn't rely on their zip code. And many of our zip codes, children go home to a house with multiple computers, with a parent who may be home, they're ready to help them with their homework, and others that may be going home to a parent who's working 2 or 3 jobs and doesn't have a computer, or a grandparent that's raising them. And so we have got to do the right thing by all school children. Texas is one of the most diverse states in the nation, socioeconomically, demographically, across the board. So you can't, as long as we are not doing the job, I heard we are barely there constitutionally, but look at our Constitution. I don't think that's something to brag about. I think that we could do so much better for our children.
Well, we want to be first and best. Isn't that the Texas way, is to be exceptional, not just okay?
It seems to be only to things that they like. I mean, not everything seems to have that same priority.
When I hear you say, Senator Menéndez, that educational attainment or educational success should not be a factor of your zip code, I actually see I keep seeing Lieutenant Governor Patrick on your shoulder.
Really?
Yeah.
That's scary. Hey,
What I hear, I may be, you think I'm hallucinating?
No, hold on. No, I'd rather be my colleague and my friend Leticia Vandepute on my shoulder.
But it is, in fact, the actual lieutenant governor I see on your shoulder, and in part because that is his argument when he says we need to be implementing some form of school choice in the state of Texas. The argument he makes in advocating for school choice is we should not allow someone's economic circumstances to be the driver of their ability to achieve something educationally.
So the answer is to take public education, drive it into the ground, and get people vouchers to go to private schools that can't sustain the 5 million kids that we have in school today. And so that's a fictitious argument. It doesn't hold water because you can't move all the Texas kids into private schools or charter schools. Right. So choice, why don't we talk to our school board member in the back of the room and say Northside Education School District, Health Careers, magnet school, or you have the Science and Engineering magnet school. You have choices within the district. And there are people from all over the city choosing to go to the Fine Arts Academy. You have choice in the public school system. We've got to make Texas public school system the best in the country. Then let's talk about other choices.
At that point, you would be willing to entertain others.
Sure.
Let me come at this maybe a slightly different way, Representative Larson. So I looked up college readiness and the dropout rate. Now I'm isolating out just San Antonio ISD, not to pick on that one district, but I'm looking at those. College readiness rate, San Antonio ISD is below the state average. The dropout rate from San Antonio ISD is double the state average. So can you, with more money, fix those problems?
I don't believe money's the only answer. Obviously, we need more innovativeness. And you can see in San Antonio, the charter schools that have emerged have had some fantastic results. And so competition is good. And I think the whole argument...
You're more open to the idea of expanding choice.
Absolutely. I think that people that I represent come into forums and they talk about having the opportunity. Now, my district's different than Jose's. If you look out on a balance, if you look at all the House districts across the state, 92% of the kids in their school districts are educated through public schools. Mine's at 80%. And so have a little bit more affluence. People are looking for options to send their kids to other places. They're paying their school taxes. They'd like to have the opportunity for choice to go to private schools. I know we've got a lot of good ones. Central Catholic, where you went to school, and all over my district there's private institutions that people who would like to send their kids. They're getting better prepared to go to college based on their scores. And so I think that there's a balancing act, because he's right. We've got to deal with 92% of the kids that are in the state are going to public schools. So you can't gut it. But I think that we need to start looking at some hybrids of it. People talk about $4,500. That seems to be the number that's being bannered about taking it and giving it to people and giving them a voucher. What's magical about $4,500? If it's less, and then we create a pilot of some sort in one of the school districts where you've got strong advocacy for choice, let's see if it works. Instead of going through the whole state and saying we're going to institute it statewide, let's see if it actually works in one of the large school districts, San Antonio ISD, Houston ISD, or Dallas ISD, and let's see if it actually materializes that competition that everybody's talking about. But right now, the competition that has emerged through the charter schools, and there was a lot of discussions about that, publicly funding charter schools. Well, they've presented pretty good results statewide. Some of them failed, but most of them have had real good results. And I think we need to continue to push competition. Competition's always good. And I've got 4 of the best school districts in the state: Comal ISD, Bernie ISD, Northside, and Northeast. I sit down with the superintendents. They compete for ideas. They're able to have school choice within Northeast and Northside because of the vocational training and other disciplines that they're focusing on and educating kids, getting them prepared for jobs that we've got in San Antonio. So, and we've talked about choice. I think that they want to make sure if this it actually is something that's realized, they want to make sure it's an even playing field, that you have to take special education kids in public school. You don't have to take them when you go into private institutions, and that's one of the big issues we're discussing right now statewide is because of that. How are we going to get around that? Because that is something that from a state perspective, I think we're failing. You know, if you look at it, we recognize about a 9% of the kids in our state are in special education. The balance of the country is at 13%.
Right.
And I think it's actually how we're looking at those kids.
And there's been reporting over the last
decisions.
couple of days in the Houston and San Antonio papers on this very subject. Let me ask Senator Menéndez, though. So Representative Larson more open to the idea of choice very quickly. As a practical matter, last couple sessions, the votes have been there in the Senate for some kind of expanded school choice, and the House has been where school choice as a public policy matter goes to die. I'm looking at the election in November, and I'm thinking the legislature is not going to change very much. You'll have a new chair of public education, but the reality is the House going to be any more receptive to school choice in the next session
I don't think it will be.
than it was? Do you have any more hope that this is going to pass?
You know, the issue, if you look at it, and the votes always break down, you know, primarily the folks from the Democratic Party are supporting the public schools. They're against the school choice issue. All of the rural Republicans, because they have no schools that they can send their kids to outside of public schools, and they always break down in support of public schools versus choice. So you've got 45 to 50 votes in the Texas House that support choice in schools. I don't see that number changing.
So you got to find more votes, otherwise it's not going to happen. Senator Menéndez, is the standardized test issue going to be back?
I hope so.
At the top of the list this time.
I hope
there
so.
are very few bipartisan issues in the state of Texas these days.
Yeah.
But there does seem to be bipartisan agreement that the standardized test system, and specifically the STAR test,
I will be
is an issue that you all need to take up.
Well, I will be refiling the bill that I said that would do away with 3 of the tests that are currently in place. That
Went down from 15 to 5.
it went down 15.5 only in high school.
Only in high school.
So what I'd like to see is a reduction of the standardized tests also in grades 8 through 3.
Yeah.
We still have high stakes testings in middle school and in elementary school.
Yeah.
And I can tell you probably one of the days was one of the most angering days, and anybody who's a parent would understand if they go talk to their 8-year-old child and they're crying and vomiting and sick, and the reason is because they're scared to take their high stakes test, because if that little 3rd grader doesn't pass that test, they're not going to get promoted to 4th grade. Even though they've gotten a 90 on every practice test, even though they've done well in class, they're scared to death that this test, because it's been drilled into their head, you have to do well or you're not going to pass. I was thinking, what the hell are we doing? What are we doing to little 8 and 9-year-old kids? I mean, why can't we do it the way we did it growing up? You took a test at the beginning, they got a baseline, you took a test at the end. That was
So
it.
why not file a bill, Senator, to eliminate all standardized tests?
We will.
In for a dime, in for a dollar.
You know, the problem is that we have federal tests that are required. My bill would have said, let's do away with every test the federal government does not require to get Nickelback money, to get the Nickelby, No Child Left Behind.
Yes.
So that I'm not a Don Quixote kind of guy. I'm not going to swing at windmills. I'm going to try to get stuff done that works. And in my 17th
And walk
year,
right up to the line of what's possible. Representative, your colleague, Representative Isaac from north of here in Hays County, has actually come out and said, I think we need to stop the STAR test, at least for the time being. Sure. I mean, there is this sentiment in both parties, right? Rare bipartisan issue.
Yeah, it
Where
is.
are you on this?
I believe that we've over-tested, and I agree with Jose. If you look at my generation, we were tested at the start, determine your aptitude, and then at the end, whether you could get into college. I think the most profound thing we've done in education was 2 sessions ago in House Bill 4. If you look at it and how we've created the new focus on vocational training. In San Antonio, we're short on jobs and dealing with the heating and air conditioning, the plumbing, all of the stuff that we do at the airport, the avionics and the rest of it. And so our focus was in 8th grade to sit down with the parents and make a declaration on whether they're going to move away from the 4x4 program that we've drilled in to the school districts for the last couple decades. And Brian Woods, the superintendent from Northside, said after the first year, they saw 25% of the kids, or 25% more than they anticipated, that the parents went down the vocational track.
Yeah.
They'll get jobs when they get out of high school, or they'll be set up to go through the apprenticeship programs that we've got in the community college. I think that really recognizes the value of our school system, taking a kid when they graduate and have an opportunity to get a meaningful job a career that can provide for their families for the rest of their life. We haven't been doing that for the last couple of decades. And I know in San Antonio in particular, there's been manufacturers, there's been people that really have applauded where the state's going. And I think that there's been business groups in Austin that said we dumbed down our educational system when we started eliminating the testing, and I disagree with that.
You don't agree. Senator Menéndez, staying on education, but higher education, here we are on a college campus, right? There's a fight emerging over affordability of higher ed, and specifically whether universities like this one, public universities, should have the ability to modestly increase their tuitions. State share of funding of higher education has dropped over time, over 25 years, to the point that the universities say with a fast-growing population, similar to what Representative Larson identified at the public ed level, that the universities simply can't do everything they were supposed to do. The increases that have been proposed by the universities are in the 2 to 3% range on average across the public universities. Lieutenant Governor Patrick, Chairman of Higher Ed Seliger, Chairman of Higher Ed Zerwas, and the House have all said they do not believe that the university should be in a position to raise their tuitions. What do you think?
Well, we should do a little bit of history. I mean, 2003, we're in a big budget crunch, and the big, I think, huge mistake is that we in the legislature allowed for the deregulation of tuition, where in the past they'd have to come talk to us prior to increasing tuition, and that was sort of a horrible arrangement. Said Bill, they said, well, if the ledge can't put the money there, let us raise it from the people.
Somebody has to pay for this.
Someone's going to have to pay for it. And so what unfortunately we've seen is, I'd love to see the bar graph, but I'm sure that it would be more than modest if you looked at the increases in tuition from 2003 to 2016.
Well, in fact, I can tell you, Senator, that tuition has actually gone up at a slower rate under deregulation than it did under regulation.
Well, then that's a good thing, but it's still going up too high.
You agree that it's too high right now?
Right. Well, the biggest problem is that there's a crunch of affordability.
Right.
And the crunch seems to be typically in the middle class. It seems to be there's people who fall. They're making too much money to get some Pell grants or other grants, but they don't make enough to where it's affordable.
Pay for it.
Yeah.
So if you get an opportunity to vote on the floor for an increase in tuition, you would be a no vote.
At this moment, I'm a no vote.
Representative?
Inherent to all the conversations that the leadership are talking about is they're going to source funding to look at how we can make it possible that these institutions can continue to grow, can attract faculty, and continue their research. And so what we're going to do is prioritize funding on the House floor and determine if this is a big issue, like everybody said it is, then we're going to have to shift some funding to make sure that we continue to have institutions like A&M, University of Texas, and the balance across the state that can provide a good education and maintain an affordability.
But the implication, Representative, is that somehow the universities are not using the money that they're getting now wisely enough or efficiently enough to have earned the right to get more. Do you believe that?
I'm not certain about that. I don't sit on higher education. I know that people are drilling down on it right now. That's one of the charges that the speaker had, is look at what we're getting and what the value is of the dollars we're spending in all the colleges across the state. And so I think when they roll that out, we'll have to make.
Well, you do sit on higher ed.
I believe that the local universities are doing the right thing. I think that some of the problems is, and I think Chancellor McGraven's gone through some concerns, and the $200 million he spent in Houston on land, and that causes sort of a red flag. Why, if you still need more money, are you buying $200 million worth of real estate for an expansion that really nobody has said okay? But if you look at UTSA, no one has used their square foot per, we did a utilization rate. No one has a better utilization rate than UTSA, teaching at night, on the weekends and stuff. So I needed to sort of correct my statement. The issue of the tuition in the state needs to fund their portion better so that the local universities don't have to continue jacking up the rates. So the problem is that we keep saying at the state, we're going to lower your tax rate, but what we're doing is we starve the organizations, public ed, higher ed, we starve. And so they have to go somewhere to get the money to keep, because if they live on the roller coaster of the funding that is the legislature, then they go get a researcher to come here from some, let's say, a UC system, and then they can't pay for them after the next session when we give them a 15% cut. So that's part of the big problem. That's the issue. So the only issue that I see is how do we level their funding sources to where they can keep what they have and maybe put some metrics in there that everybody can feel good about how they're using the money.
Now, you know, Senator, education for years and years, every 2-year budget that you pass has been the highest spend, the biggest line item, up until this budget where healthcare has finally risen to meet, or depending upon how you do the math, even slightly go beyond education. Healthcare is becoming the most problematic piece of the budget because it's growing quickly and largely growing unrestrained. And that's in part because you have a lot of people in the state who don't have access to coverage or don't have access to medical professionals to treat them.
Right.
What are you all going to do about that this session? It seems like the last couple of sessions you all have been slow playing a solution. Are we at the point now where you have to come up with some way to slow the growth of the cost of health care?
I'm convinced that the state of Texas is being so short-sighted and being a poor steward of our taxpayers' dollars by not tapping on the $9 to $10 billion a year of federal tax dollars that are set aside for our state. It's if this
You
were
mean expanding Medicaid?
expanding Medicaid, because if these were highway dollars, we'd be up in arms. You know, I mean, remember when Kay Bailey wrote the bill, because Texas was such a donor state, we were only getting 70 cents on every dollar we sent to the feds on highway dollars.
Right.
So now we get 90 cents on the dollar because she wrote the law. We should have those $9 to $10 billion down here, and those federal dollars would subsidize, would lower our uninsured, would lower our obligation that we have when people show up at the emergency room uncompensated.
But are you under any illusion, Senator, that the conservative leadership of this state, which is going to be the same leadership next time as it was last time, is going to wake up in January and go, you know what I forgot to do? Expand Medicaid.
Yeah.
I mean, elections have consequences.
Yeah.
Your side has not been able to prevail, and the fact is that people in leadership don't want to expand Medicaid. So in the absence of that, what will you do?
We have to continue to fight and illustrate what happens when you don't. We can't just sit quietly and not express the realities. Look, the healthcare budget has been for some time more than education, but it's been smoke and mirrors. It's been moving the day that we make payments to the next fiscal year. I mean, for years we've been using smoke and mirrors. It wasn't until Speaker Strauss came in and said we need to have some truth in budgeting that we actually started getting rid of some of those smoke and mirrors and lowering artificially the cost of our health care. I mean, that's partly due to our huge population.
Right.
People can't forget we're the second most populated state in the nation, and we're the leading in uninsured.
Now, as of the numbers that just came out yesterday, we're down to 17.1%, 4.6 million people in the state of Texas without health insurance, and Bexar County and San Antonio specifically have a higher average of uninsured than the rest of the state. Let me put this back on. You do not believe in expanding Medicaid. You are not for it.
Just inherent distrust with Washington right now. People out of Texas, we've continued to sit down and have a dialogue with them. We'd like to have a block grant, and we can make decisions on health care delivery, and if we're going to do it that way. But the way that the program's set up right now, I think we're concerned about $19 trillion in hole that the federal government's at, and it doesn't seem to be curtailing the deficit spending. So when we get to the point where the federal government will no longer have the funds to fund these programs, they'll be set up, and then you're going to see a huge shortfall.
It's going to suddenly come back onto us.
And so I think we're using good discipline, and our preference was not to go about doing it the way the other states have set up the exchanges, agree to all of the stipulations that are built into the federal
But if you look,
program.
Representative, since the Affordable Care Act's been in effect for the last 6 years, the rate of the uninsured in Texas has dropped, but it's dropped by a smaller amount than in the states that expanded. That doesn't tell you that if you had expanded, that the uninsured population and therefore health care costs would have dropped as well?
I can tell you we have a health care net in the state of Texas. The county facilities, I was a county commissioner for 12 years here. We have a program that's set up to deal with indigent health care. They do a fantastic job. I think we need to continue to make sure that we fund the hospitals here and throughout the state that do that delivery. Does it provide them the choice to go pick whatever hospital they want to go to? No, it doesn't. But it does provide a health care for them, and we lose that in the debate. A lot of times we talk about absent of a health care subsidy from the federal government, the folks in the state of Texas won't have health care. That is absolutely not the case.
No, but the problem is, Lyle, while it's true that we have University Hospital, one of the best in the nation. The problem is it's more expensive to treat at the emergency room a pneumonia for a child that, had they had a primary care physician, could have treated their bronchitis with antibiotics.
I agree, and I think in Bexar County we've done a pretty good job setting up a CareLink program where we've done the outreach. We've built 4 satellite hospitals around the community so they don't go to the emergency room. And so I think it's going to be based on the innovativeness of each of the community hospitals that we have. I think San Antonio's got a pretty good system in dealing with indigent health care.
And even though we do, we're still one of the leading states with the highest percentage.
Well, and the reality is, Representative Larson, if somebody goes to the emergency room to be treated as part of the indigent health care system, it's free for them. It's not free for the rest of us, because those costs are passed on to the rest of us in the form of taxes. You're not a big fan of taxes.
No, but we've set up a program where we have satellite clinics, and we work with Dr. Gomez with the Barrio clinics, and we work, and so all of that, we've been able to create a situation where healthcare delivery in San Antonio is provided for everyone that accesses it. And we had a problem with all of them stacking into the emergency centers or the emergency rooms in all the hospitals throughout the community, not only at University Health System, but at Methodist and at Baptist and the balance of them. We've gone out and aggressively pursued that to keep folks from doing that. And again, the model for the nation is the CareLink program, where folks can come in, they can access care, they pay for a portion, whatever they're able to pay for, and we've been able to curtail the number of people that are coming to the emergency rooms, but you can't avoid it completely, and it's just part of the system. But I just don't like the idea that people in Texas, they're always talking about the option of going to the Affordable Care Act. I think in the long run, based on our partner would be the federal government, they're $19 trillion in the hole. It's not sustainable. I'd rather do it the way we're doing it.
What happens, Senator, Representative, if Hillary Clinton should win the presidential race? I know that there was a hope in some quarters in the legislature you may get a Republican in the White House in 2017 who would repeal and replace. You may be suffering from Obama nostalgia before this is over.
Well,
in terms of this issue and several others, if you may be saying, "Where's that nice guy from Kenya? Where'd he go?" Actually, I may need him back here because I don't like what we ended up with. I mean, what are you going to do if you get a Democratic president, this Democratic president? What are you going to do?
Well, she probably ought to go to that emergency room you're talking about, based on her health.
This is why you brought up pneumonia. Yeah. God, I knew it. I hadn't figured it out. All right, I want to be sure we touch on a couple things before we bring the audience in. Senator Menéndez, I mentioned in passing taxes because it is into property taxes, into the property tax bucket, where these uncompensated care costs pop up for all of us. You all orchestrated a change in the homestead exemption that reduced modestly property taxes around the state were promised to, and you cut the business tax by 25%. There is a definite drumbeat for more tax cuts. Price of oil is now down about $45. It is not where it was at the start of the last session. Right. You'll have less money to spend. Mm-hmm. Will you be able to afford to give people tax cuts in this session, or will those dollars need to go somewhere else?
I think that we should all look at the fact that price of gas, gallon per gas is way down. I think we need to look at how affordable is it to live in Texas. I think Texas is one of the most affordable states to live in terms of your cost of housing, your cost of food, your cost of gas. And the state, as a state, we've lowered taxes. The county is continuously lowering taxes. The cities are looking at. So if all of that's going on, and yet we're growing by 80,000 students, by some accounts 300 to 500 people every year moving into Texas. If we were a business and we're getting all these new customers, would we cut the resources we need to serve the new customers? No, we wouldn't. So we need to use a little of this intuitive common sense that we talk a lot about in Texas.
You don't see it as a tax cut, you see it as a revenue cut.
It is a revenue cut. And the thing is that we're growing. So how? Because we hear all the time people complaining about quality of sometimes streets, quality of public education, quality of access to health care. We've got to be smarter. I mean, our number one responsibility is to be good fiscal stewards of the taxpayer dollar.
Right.
And that means looking at both sides of the balance equation. You've got to look both at the cost and the revenue side.
Yeah.
And sometimes you invest in a business when it's growing in your future growth.
Right.
You've got to be prepared for more people are coming in. I mean, because the worst thing we can do, whether it's public education, let's say we don't continue to fund it accurately, Then what happens? So let's give waivers. Now kindergarten teacher can have 30 students. Okay, so now kindergarten goes from a place where they get a foundation for first grade to a publicly subsidized daycare.
Yeah.
I want the best in quality, best in class for our state at every level.
Do you challenge Senator Menendez's contention that if you cut taxes, you end up with less revenue and therefore less of an ability to solve the problems of this state?
Well, I do believe we need appraisal reform. In San Antonio, over the last 10 years, we've seen the median income of people in San Antonio has been surpassed by 2.5 times based on our tax rate increases, and it's based on the appraisals going up. So we definitely need some reforms. My idea would be that if you go in and you protest it, whether it's your house or your business, and you're able to sit down with your peers at the appraisal review board and sit down and figure out if based on comparables in and around it that there's a 20% reduction on what they sent you, then that should hold. It should hold within inflation or no more than 5%. Right now, we're seeing increases in my district up to 50, 60% increases in 1 year. And people can't plan for that. And so there's got to be some ability to figure out a reasonable approach. If your assessments are going up, and we don't have a lot of jurisdictions across the state that will go ahead and reduce the tax rate. In Bexar County, when I was there, we reduced it 7 times as we saw the appraisals going up. But the city of San Antonio stayed static. They stayed at 57
Right,
cents.
but what about
throughout
the representative? What about the revenue implications for that? I think everybody loves to get a tax cut, and politicians especially love to knock on doors during campaign season and say, we gave you a tax cut. But at the end of the day, you've got to spend money on programs that the government administers. Will you have enough if you do what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking about if people went out and they protested their taxes and they were able to prevail upon the appraisal review board to reduce it, that they shouldn't go up automatically the next year. And so that's what the bill's going to say.
Right.
That if you're able to sit down with your peers and get a reasonable valuation, that we shouldn't see the dramatic increases that we're seeing in Bexar County and throughout the state.
But there are consequences.
But I think what I think Lyle's alluding to is it's a common sense approach. I think what he's saying is, look, if they agreed that your taxes should be here, they shouldn't try to make it up in the next year going up 50%. Right. All of that makes sense. He's not talking about a tax cut. That was not a cut. That was actually treating people fairly.
It's reform of the system.
It's reform. And the other thing we have to talk about, well, how is it that we can say, okay, we gave you $800 million for border security last session, and they come back and say we need $300 million more. Well, what the heck did you do with $800?
I'm going there next.
That's $1.1 billion.
Right, I'm going there next. So the other big issue that's going to spike up before we go to questions from the audience is will be, in fact, border security funding. It's already spiked up. House wanted somewhere south of $600 million. Senate wanted more than $800 million. You agreed on $800 million in the final budget passed. And the concern has been that the Department of Public Safety has not come back, despite being asked repeatedly, to provide data showing how those dollars are being spent and whether they're getting bang for their buck. And now they've asked for more than $1 billion in the next budget.
I voted no, and I'd vote again.
And you'd vote again no. You've not been given any indication in the last year plus that this was a good decision on the part of the legislature.
You know what I hear from people in the Valley is that what they see is a DPS officer parked every half mile. That what we have is like a row of DPS officers. Now, those officers are doing what they're asked to do, okay? And DPS is saying, well, we've got $800 million, we've got to spend it, I guess.
Yeah.
And so the question is, well, but how does that somehow improve the border security?
Do you think the magnitude of the problem that was trying to be solved here was exaggerated?
I disagree with whatever their solution to whatever perceived problem they saw.
Do you think the problem is only perceived and not real?
I do. I think there were less people coming across the border. I think there have been more apprehensions and more people deported under President Obama than there were under President Bush.
Right. You challenge those stats?
Well, I believe we need more interoperability. One of the issues we've got are the sheriff's offices down there. We've got border patrol down there. The federal government has increased significantly the number of border patrol agents we have. I think the state stepped in because there were some holes built into it. I think we went about it the right way. We're training DPS officers with interdiction training, both human and drug interdiction. And I think we're going to sit down, look at the metrics we set up determine if the commander comes back and said, here's what the results are based on the 250 officers. The $300 million increase they're talking about is they're going to set up 250 more officers with the proper training. And I think Jose's right. Before we had this training, we had DPS officers that didn't have the training, and they were just pulling people over, giving a lot of tickets in the valley, and people are going, well, I'm not the issue, the focus. I think we've got more of a laser focus. If we're going to be involved in border security, and I think our state is committed, unlike any other state in the union, we're putting money up to try to secure our border.
But do you believe that the results so far, do you have adequate data back that prove that that first $800 million was the right amount to spend?
The data's still coming through, but what I have seen is with the people that we have properly trained, I think that the border guard unit, that was more aesthetics. There was a lot of politics in there. The reason being is I think the federal provision and Passe Comitatus didn't allow them to go in and work effectively if we had drug traffickers coming across. Now we've got an option where these folks can come in and actually help and with coordinated efforts. I've heard a lot of complaints from the sheriff's offices and the Border Patrol folks of the state people are standing outside of it. It has to be integrated. And if it's not integrated, then it's not going to be effective. To have 3 different command strategies to deal with the same issue, I think is inefficient at every level, the local, state, and federal
So
level.
Senator said he was a no vote last time. He'd be a no vote this time. You were a yes vote last time.
I was a yes vote, and I'll be a yes
you'll
vote
be a yes-
this time,
you'll be a
but
yes vote.
with scrutiny.
But
I
here's
mean,
the deal. On council, when we went to the back to basics budget, the first thing we said when I was council was, let's eliminate duplication of efforts. We have triplication of efforts on this issue.
In this case.
You've got the feds, you've got the local law enforcement, and DPS. If we could get rid of that $800 million layer, I guarantee you that, not to be, Lyle and I could invest that $800 million and get a better return for our taxpayers.
Than what we're getting. We're going to go to audience questions. We'll have microphones walked around. We'll ask that you put your hand up. We'll take as many as time permits. Agnes, let me know when we have about 2 minutes left. I want to ask one last question of our guests before we let them go. Gentleman over there, gentleman over here next.
First off, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to speak with all of us today. My quick question really just kind of go back to the education and health issue. How have each of you engaged the faith community in your constituencies to sit down with them and learn more about the things that we're doing in the faith community to meet and solve the education and health needs for our families?
And is there a role, let me expand that and say, what role should the faith community play in these conversations, Senator?
I think the faith communities have been a backbone of our communities for years. I mean, it depends on what town, where you are, where you live, you heard Lyle talk about rural Texas and how they've been traditionally opposed. Well, because there are no private schools in rural Texas or charter schools, and so traditionally it's the school, it's the church house, and it's the same community, though. If you think about it, it's the same people. It's just the role that they play. And so I think there's a role for our faith communities to play, but I don't think that it can complement, but it cannot supplant.
Can't replace it.
It cannot replace the role that we have. We have a constitutional requirement to provide a public education for every child because our forefathers knew that it should not matter what part of the state you were living in to get a good education.
Both and, not either or?
I believe that San Antonio is fortunate. We do have a lot of faith-based educational institutions that have provided a lot for this community, and we need to continue to support it. I know that Incarnate Word's looking at expanding in their medical school, and that's something they're coming to the state. All of that, I believe, has merit based on Baylor and other schools coming forward asking for the same thing. So we're very fortunate in that regard. A lot of large communities in the state don't have what we have. The Catholic organizations here have been the backbone for 200 years, and they've been a big part of our educational system and our healthcare delivery.
Yeah.
Sir, right there. Yes.
My name is David Plyler, and my question has to do with an editorial that was in this morning's San Antonio Express News that says that Senator Patrick is going to work to eliminate the provision that now allows residents of Texas who are undocumented immigrants to go to attend college paying in-state tuition. My question is, what's your position on that issue?
There was, in fact, a passing attempt, Representative Larson, in the last 2 sessions to overturn what is a law going back to 2001.
I was in the House, my first session, when we passed that deal. And so that was Representative Rick Noriega out of Houston. And then Governor Perry signed the bill.
Signed the bill.
And so people, you know, David, you got it almost right in the sense of who can do this. You have to be a student who was brought as a child. You have to have graduated from a Texas high school. And so therefore, many of these students don't have any ties to Mexico. They don't speak Spanish in many cases. Texas is the only home they've known. And so the decision we made was, rather than price these kids out of college, if they get into college on their own merits, this is not an automatic admission. This is one of the misnomers is these kids are taking the place of other people.
Well, it's often conflated, admission
It is.
and tuition. It's actually purely in-state tuition rates.
That's all it is.
Right.
It just says that if you get in, if you made it on your own to get into college, you pay the same rate as the person you graduated
You
with.
feel like this law should remain in place, no change.
Absolutely.
Representative, you know, Governor Perry in his 2012 presidential campaign, people think that oops was the thing that did him in. It was actually this issue at the Tea Party debate in Florida where he was booed over defending the in-state tuition law in Texas. Where do you come down on this?
There's probably other things they booed him on as well.
Possibly. Did you see him dance the other night?
Yeah.
He probably wishes he was doing in-state tuition instead.
Yeah. The two-step he's good at. That third step's always the problem. for him.
Oops, that's it, exactly. What do you think?
Yeah, I had.
You're welcome, by the way, for setting you up.
Yeah.
You know, that's a fellow Aggie, man.
I know, he's an Aggie and Republican.
But there are some things, though.
Yeah. I had a bill to eliminate the in-state tuition on two different sessions, and I know that Jose and I had a discussion about it at one time. And my deal is, if you've got to somebody, and this happens all the time. I had a real good friend that I went to MacArthur High School with. They moved out right before their kid graduated, and they moved to Ohio. Wanted to come to the University of Texas. Had to pay out-of-state tuition because they didn't live there. Her junior and senior year, she was in Ohio high school, and then that's replicated throughout the state.
But that person wasn't a resident, right, Representative?
Wasn't a resident. You're right. But
And
what
he's talking
I'm
about
saying
residents,
is,
right?
if we're talking about prioritization of funding at higher education, let's focus on the kids that are in state that are documented and they're not illegal. They didn't come in. They're not going in and they're applying.
Will you file your bill?
Their parents. No, I'm not going to file it, but I know it will be filed.
You believe it will be filed?
It'll be discussed, but I still think that there's a prioritization there, and I have a philosophical difference with Jose on that. I think that, again, if we're strapped and we're making hard decisions, some of those decisions does not preclude those folks from going to A&M or UTSA. They're just not going to pay you.
So would you guarantee that spot not taken by an undocumented student would be mandated to be taken by an out-of-state resident of the United States so that those out-of-state tuition dollars would be paid instead?
Now, my preference is for the kids that are in the state of Texas, and we need to prioritize.
Which would have no budget implications.
Right.
Yeah, but we don't determine who gets in, right? We don't determine that. Let's extrapolate.
We thought about that last session.
Yeah, let's extrapolate, though, that kid that no longer, let's say, graduated from, pick a school, and give me a high school in your district.
Smithson Valley.
Smithson Valley. They graduate from there. They can't go to UTSA now because now UTSA is 3 times the tuition, out-of-state tuition, right? So now they're flipping burgers or doing something else. Now maybe they get married, they have kids. Now they're living below the poverty line. Guess what? Now they're costing the state money because they're going to be on potentially programs that we have to pay for. Instead, they could have gone to get an education because maybe working flipping burgers, they could still get a BA in something, get a better paying job, and be contributing members of society. It's just short-sighted. It's why all businesses were supportive of in-state tuition.
Let me take another question here. Agnes, you pick. Sir?
Thanks.
And then the woman behind you, please.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Terry Burns. I'm the local chair of the Sierra Club, and
Yes.
I wanted to touch on water issues that you mentioned earlier, very important. We oppose Vista Ridge as a excessively expensive and unnecessary importation of water, and also the not only the fiscal but the property condemnation procedures that may incur. And I wanted to ask Mr. Larson about the water grid that he has proposed for a statewide water system, which is very much like California started 100 years ago. Now California does not have enough water to ship in that system, and California currently spends 20% of its energy, the whole state's energy use, 20% on shipping water around the state.
Let's get him to address that.
California, they've handcuffed themselves because 45% of their water they've dedicated for environmental concerns. And so the most part, the grid is a great idea. We've got it for electricity. We need to have conveyance and connectivity. If you look at the climate and what's happening over the last 5 centuries in the state of Texas, we've had a drought between 5 and 7 years every century for the last 5. And so knowing that we have 84 years left, we're going to have that drought 5 to 7 years. If you look at 2011, we lost 84 million acre-feet of water to surface and groundwater depletions. We still haven't fully recovered on our groundwater. And all of our water is overprescribed at the surface level, so we need to get very innovative. But we also need to set up a strategic plan that would lay out a network so we can move water into the population centers where needed. We need to encourage conservation, more effective and efficient ways to irrigate our crops, but all of it needs to be brought into a system. Right now, we've got 16 regions that plan separate from each other. We have no connectivity. We've balkanized our water because we fight each other fiercely on these artificial boundaries. We're all Texans. We need to focus our resources, especially water, and I believe that's our biggest challenge. When this El Nino pattern ends, and usually after 2 wet seasons in the El Nino weather pattern, we're about to get into a La Nina pattern that most likely will go 3 or 4 years without any precipitation.
So you think a drought is
absent of a grid, a lot of small communities are going to be left out of water.
You think a drought is coming?
Absolutely. I mean, based on a tree ring analysis and weather patterns in the past, it's coming. And unfortunately, we've lost right now, as of June 30th of this year, through all of 2000, we lost 150 million acre-feet of water to the coastline flowing down our rivers. Shame on us. And it's because of lack of planning. Most of the states west of us have pipes in that river. They're pulling the water up and they're storing it underground when we do hit that drought. And so we're pushing more aggressive aquifer storage and recovery legislation and create a situation where the environmental flows are more than taken care of to the coastline. You got 150 million acre-feet of water. They're flushing out the marshes. I think most of that water needs to be stored underground instead of losing it forever into the coast where it costs you 10 times as much to treat it and pump it back into our population areas. We need to get a whole lot smarter on our water policy.
Let's take one more question here, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Lisa. I'm a volunteer with Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. We support the Second Amendment and we support common sense gun laws like most Texans do. My question is about the horrific shooting of the Dallas police officers this summer. I'm wondering what you think a legislative response might be to help protect our law enforcement.
Is there anything that you all will do on this issue or could have done or could do going forward to prevent another situation like the one we just had?
Well, again, I think anytime we talk about gun violence, people jump back and they want the government to regulate it. I feel a whole lot safer in Texas than I do in a lot of states where you have a lot of gun-free zones. I'd much rather have the opportunity to protect myself and my family when the opportunity is put in front of me. And so I understand where you're coming from and I understand the initiatives that y'all are pursuing. You're concerned about constitutional carry and making sure that people have adequate training before they are provided the opportunity to have a gun in the state. I think a majority of the lawmakers agree with that. That's why constitutional carry didn't come up.
It'll come back again though this session.
But there's got to be provisions where you have properly trained. Even most of my friends that have license to carry both open and concealed, they agree that training needs to be taking place so people have at least the opportunity to look down, have comprehensive background checks, also look at the issue of these people, if put in that situation, that they don't injure innocent bystanders.
And you are against constitutional carry. If it
I am.
came up, you'd be opposed.
On
Senator.
this issue, though, we could do some simple things like If you've got a record of domestic violence, you probably shouldn't have access to a gun. If you're on the no-fly list, you know, there's common sense ways to get yourself taken off the no-fly list if it's your name was confused. But you shouldn't be prying a gun if that we think you're a terrorist. I mean, there's a lot of things that are already easy, low-hanging fruit that we could do. It would be nice to see. I mean, last session, when we did this, no, we no longer have a concealed license. You know, it's just a handgun license. You carry it however you want. So, but since it's open now, you can carry it. I had talked about what if you had a fax, you know, some sort of thing that would give law enforcement the idea that you were licensed to carry and have a holster, like police departments have to have a holster that no one can come up behind and just grab it. It has sort of a safety mechanism. All of those things were killed that are just common sense measures that even law enforcement was in favor of.
Well, you may have some version of that come back. We are at 1 o'clock, but I want to ask one very quick question. This is the worst presidential campaign that many of us have seen in our lifetimes, right?
Yeah.
He's the only one she can beat. She's the only one he can beat.
Out of 300 million people, that's who we ended up
Are
with.
you enthusiastic about supporting your party's nominee?
Absolutely.
You are with her, as they say.
I am with her.
Are you on the Trump train?
I am.
Enthusiastically?
I am.
I'm going to let that pause be the last word. But you know, good on you both for giving a straightforward answer. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
we're very fortunate to have had not enough time, but time we had.
Too,
with these two, please thank Representative Larson, Senator Menéndez.
Evan, real quick.
Yes.
Did you hear what he's talking about thinking forward with the water issue?
Yeah.
If we could only talk about thinking forward with education, with healthcare, with everything long-term like that, we'd be in better shape.
Okay, that's a good optimistic note to end on. Thank you all very much. Thank you, UTSA. We appreciate it.